This is the most skilled shopper I've ever seen. As soon as he entered the luxury store, he was drawn by the call of the jewelry. None could escape his eye, and with a wave of his hand, they all ended up in his bag. The secretary behind him had long since grown accustomed to this, making it look more like he was buying wholesale at a market. Even the store owner was taken aback by his confidence. You might think he's just wealthy, but he's actually a luxury collector. He's filled one basement and even spent $10 million on a limited edition piece of clothing. Only 100 of these exist globally, each numbered from 1 to 100. The smaller the number, the higher the price, with the number 1 item selling for $10 million and number 2 for $9.99 million. With each number, the price dropped slightly. With only a minute before the sale opened, wealthy buyers from around the world anxiously awaited. When the time arrived, they rushed to purchase, and within 10 seconds, the items sold out. Successful buyers celebrated, while disappointed ones threw down their empty bags. Lewis, sitting at his computer, had just managed to snag the one-of-a-kind piece for $10 million. At that moment, his secretary came to call him for breakfast. Lewis took off his sunglasses, revealing dark circles from an all-nighter. He'd mastered the art of global online shopping. Exhausted, he decided to nap, but his secretary reminded him of a new product release. Hearing this, Lewis got anxious. He could skip breakfast, but he couldn't miss a sale. The secretary smiled, knowing he had read his young master perfectly. The reason Lewis loves shopping so much goes back to his past. Losing both parents early, he was raised by his grandmother, who sent him abroad for safety. For 20 years, he hadn't seen her, only interacting with his secretary and servants and living a royal lifestyle. Surrounded by such luxury, he became a shopaholic. But one day, he received news that his grandmother was critically ill. Lewis and his secretary rushed to the airport, but there was only one seat left on the plane. For the first time, he had to leave his secretary behind and travel alone. After getting off the plane, he immediately drove to the hospital, but at a turn, a large truck suddenly crashed into him. This was Bakshil's first time taking a train to the city, but she didn't notice the woman across from her eyeing her bag. When the girl started eating, the woman swallowed, so the kind girl offered her some food. The woman took it and devoured it, but suddenly choked and asked the girl to buy her some water. The girl set her bag down and ran off, but when she returned, the woman and her bag were gone. She panicked, realizing all her money was in the bag. She hadn't even reached the city yet and was already facing trouble. After getting off the train, she immediately sought help from the staff. Without a phone, she couldn't even file a missing item report. Looking at the crowd, she decided to use her last trick. She spotted a man with yellow glasses, approached him, and took out her treasure. While he was still surprised, she pulled him aside and started pitching it, thinking it was some new scam. He was about to leave, but the girl loudly explained her situation. The man hesitated, then decided to help, giving her a down payment of $100,000 and agreeing to pay the remaining $900,000 once the item's authenticity was confirmed. He left his name and phone number. With this money, the girl reached the city, feeling lost. Her purpose in coming was to find her runaway brother, but not knowing anything about the city, she wasn't sure where to start. The next morning, she hit the streets, handing out flyers. Suddenly, she spotted her brother in the crowd, recognizing the clothes he'd worn when he left home. She rushed over, but the face she saw was that of a handsome stranger. Though surprised, she was certain she hadn't made a mistake. She pulled open his coat to reveal the unique mark she'd left on the clothes and took him to the police station. After some questioning, she discovered he'd lost his memory. Since she was still searching for her brother, she decided to keep him with her until he regained his memory. Little did she know, this seemingly ordinary man actually had an extraordinary identity. At the scene of the traffic accident, the police were discussing this case when a young man in the distance sighed. Little did he know, he was one of the accident's victims. He had been rushing to the hospital to see his critically ill grandmother, driving alone when he collided with a large truck the previous night. Though he managed to survive, he woke up with memory loss. His family assumed he hadn't made it, and the next day, they held a funeral. Little did they know, this was part of a long-planned scheme. Meanwhile, the amnesiac Louis met a girl from the countryside. Soon, they faced their first challenge. With one having no memory and the other without any money, finding a place to stay was tough. After some searching, they ended up at a bathhouse, where for just the cost of a bath, they could stay overnight. For Louis, who had been pampered all his life, this place was like discovering a new world. Even instant noodles from a convenience store tasted like a rare delicacy, making him question what he'd been eating before. Then, the girl spotted someone outside. It was the same woman from the train who had stolen her bag. They chased her, but the woman was incredibly strong, slipping onto a bus like a rabbit. Just when she thought she was safe, the girl appeared behind her. As soon as the bus stopped, the girl lunged and managed to catch the woman. Back at the convenience store, Louis was waiting for the girl, but instead, a gang dragged him to an alley, demanding his money or he'd get beaten up. But when they searched him, they realized he truly had nothing on him and seemed quite clueless. Frustrated, they kicked him, and at that moment, Louis faintly remembered something from before his accident. Just then, the girl arrived and delivered a kick to the gang leader. They fought in a chaotic scene. However, the gang managed to steal the little money they had left, leaving the two penniless again. With no other choice, the girl took Louis to her workplace, unaware that the company was actually owned by Louis's wealthy family. They quietly sipped coffee and sneaked into the restroom to sleep. The next morning, Louis was spotted by a company executive. He tried to run, barely escaping into an elevator, but almost got recognized by his former fiancée. Later, with help from a co-worker, they finally rented a small room. It was empty, but at least they now had a place to shelter. The next day, while working, an executive didn't notice a puddle on the floor and slipped, nearly breaking his back. Furious, he called over his assistant, only to realize it was someone familiar. He was the very person who had previously bought the initial installment of a product from Bokshil, but then disappeared without a trace. Bokshil was enraged and grabbed his collar, demanding an explanation. Jungwon lightly pushed Bokshil away, causing her to fall. At the hospital, tests revealed that Bokshil had fainted due to overwork. Feeling guilty, Jungwon realized he was somewhat responsible. When Bokshil woke up, Jungwon immediately paid her the remaining amount, explaining that he'd been unreachable because his phone broke. He then offered Bokshil a job in the company's planning department, advising her to rest up on the weekends and eat well. With his new funds, Bokshil immediately took Louis on a shopping spree, buying delicious street food, affordable yet quality clothing, and all the daily essentials. Louis, thanks to his unique shopping skills, found the best bargains, and Bokshil bought his first ever mobile phone. They soon returned home, loaded with bags. The next day, Bokshil started his new role, ready to face new challenges. However, she encountered a problem right from the start. The wealthy Jungwon, every time he introduced a potential match his parents suggested, would end up frustrating them so much they would stop contacting each other. But that day, as Jungwon was heading upstairs, a cleaner accidentally bumped into him, and with that collision, she captured his heart, something he had never experienced before. He decided to keep her close and offered her a position in the planning department, leaving his co-workers in shock. Bokshil, a child from the mountains, was working in a city office for the first time. However, it became apparent on her first day that she didn't know how to use a computer or navigate the internet, and she had just bought her first phone the day before. Her co-workers began to gossip, noticing the awkward atmosphere. Jungwon, seeing this, tried to help by asking Bokshil to go buy a cup of coffee. Her co-workers then added to the order, requesting more drinks that Bokshil had never heard of. Fortunately, a co-worker named Mary stepped in. She took her to the coffee shop, and as Bokshil watched her skillfully place orders, she felt as though she had met a kind angel. That day, Jungwon informed Bokshil that the company had a new planning project. Although Bokshil was a newcomer, she was encouraged to participate in the project for practice. Excited, Bokshil eagerly shared her design ideas with Mary, seeing her as a trustworthy and kind friend. However, to her surprise, the next day at the meeting, Mary presented Bokshil's design as her own, and the proposal was approved. Bokshil was stunned, watching Mary's smug expression, realizing she had been foolishly used. At the celebration, everyone congratulated Mary, while Bokshil sat alone in a corner, ignored by the others. Making an excuse, Bokshil tried to leave, but Mary wouldn't let it go and demanded an apology. What Mary didn't know was that Jungwon had seen Bokshil's original design draft and was aware of Mary's theft. However, he didn't intervene directly, wanting Bokshil to learn from this experience. On a stormy night, Louis found Bokshil suffering from a high fever. He rushed out to get medicine and, following the doctor's instructions, carefully took care of Bokshil. Bokshil awoke in the middle of the night to find Louis by his side, and despite still being sick, Bokshil insisted on going to work. At work, Jungwon noticed Bokshil's lack of energy, and though worried, pretended to ask casually about his health. Learning that Bokshil was genuinely unwell, Jungwon ordered her to go home and rest instead of coming to office. Meanwhile, the company president secretly arranged for a mysterious man to take a sample of Louis's baby tooth and a blood-stained watch for genetic testing. After comparing the samples, the doctor concluded that the blood did not match the tooth, meaning the deceased from the accident was not Louis. The mysterious man immediately informed the president, who was stunned. Just as the president looked up, Louis was suddenly right there in front of him. Seeing Louis approach, the president was frozen in shock. Louis, having recognized the president from television, greeted him casually, nearly giving the president a heart attack. Louis was there to bring porridge to Bokshil. At that moment, Bokshil emerged, and Louis pulled Bokshil over to introduce him to the president, asking the president to look after her. Bokshil tried to pull Louis away. As the president gathered his thoughts, he immediately arranged to meet with the mysterious man, confused as to why Louis hadn't recognized him. The president ordered the mysterious man to monitor Jungwon, Bokshil, and Louis, wanting to uncover Jungwon's motives for hiring an uneducated country girl. One day, as Bokshil and Louis passed a cafe holding hands, a female colleague saw them and, surprised, asked about their relationship. Louis proudly claimed to be Bokshil's guardian, which sent the gossipy colleague rushing back to the office to share the shocking news. Bokshil was dating a very handsome guy. Hearing this, Jungwon was taken aback and decided to buy fruit to visit Bokshil. As he headed upstairs, the mysterious man discreetly followed and reported Jungwon's visit to Bokshil's house to the president. Meanwhile, Bokshil and Louis were at home, arguing about whether to drink porridge first or tidy the room. Bokshil accidentally spilled hot porridge on Louis. Just then, Jungwon entered and was shocked to witness the scene. Rumors started circulating that Jungwon might be in love with Bokshil. Jealous and anxious, Jungwon confronted Louis, insisting that Louis should move in with him instead. When Louis refused, Jungwon tried to boast about his comfortable home, but Louis, unimpressed by material things, still preferred to stay with Bokshil. Jungwon didn't know what else to do. The next day, the mysterious man bribed the class leader to gather information about Bokshil and Louis, finally revealing to the president that Louis had amnesia. Jungwon, after a sleepless night filled with worries, couldn't accept the idea of two adults over 20 living in the same room. The next morning, Jungwon put on his glasses and told Bokshil that they were going on a business trip, and Bokshil had to accompany him. Though Jungwon had intended it to be a special trip with just her, an unexpected third person was added to the group. Mary was unhappy but couldn't argue, while Bokshil messaged Louis that she'd be accompanying the boss and the team leader on a business trip, advising him to buy his own dinner. Suspecting this business trip was really an excuse for a date, Louis decided to pursue them to prevent Bokshil from falling into the boss's clutches. Meanwhile, next day, Louis, attempting purse Bokshil, was hit by a car. Just when everyone thought the man had stopped breathing, Louis suddenly opened his eyes. He noticed that the flowers prepared for Bokshil had been ruined, and feeling upset, demanded that the driver pay 3,000 as compensation. At that moment, a neighboring aunt arrived in time, telling Louis to lie back down on the ground, and then requested 2,000,000 won from Mary. Mary was stunned, as Louis had only asked for 3,000. The aunt, with just a few words, managed to raise the compensation demand by 2,000,000. Louis, who had a hard time saving money, quickly started sharing his thoughts online. His sharp reviews on Jungwon's company unexpectedly made him an internet sensation, bringing him fame and followers. While Louis enjoyed his newfound online success, Jungwon was deeply worried. Louis's actions not only led to a decline in product sales, but also damaged the company's reputation. After some investigation, it was discovered that the phone ID used for the posts was linked to Bokshil. Jung-won knew immediately that Bok-shil couldn't be behind this and suspected Louis was responsible. He warned Louis that if he didn't stop posting, the company might have to fire Bok-shil because of the situation. Panicked, Louis, wanting to protect Bok-shil's hard-won job, made a deal with Jung-won and agreed to move into Jung-won's home. However, Louis then signed an unfair agreement. Once settled in Jung-won's home, Louis cleverly turned the tables, making himself the dominant one. He even prepared a massive surprise when Jung-won's parents came home, giving the impression that they were a couple. When his parents saw them together, they mistakenly believed the two were in a relationship, which left Jung-won in a bind. Not only did he end up being mistaken as Louis's partner, but he also found himself becoming a full-time caretaker in his own home. One day, after returning home from work, Jung-won walked in on a scene that caused his blood pressure to skyrocket. He reminded himself that he had willingly brought this upon himself and should stay calm, but he couldn't hold back. Under Jung-won's threat, the two began to clean up the disaster area. During this, Curly Hair revealed that Louis had fallen victim to a phone scam, losing all of Bok-shil's savings, and had even maxed out Bok-shil's credit card this month. Without hesitation, Jung-won ordered Louis to go work at a construction site to experience some real hardship. Louis, who had never done manual labor, finally understood Bok-shil's struggles. When he got home, he collapsed onto the sofa, groaning in pain and begging Jung-won to apply medicinal patches on him. Soon, he was covered in patches. Next day, Jung-won was already off to work to earn money, leaving Louis to rely on Curly Hair for help. Curly Hair mentioned that he saw a suspicious person on his way, explaining that the house Bok-shil Fushi was staying had been the scene of an unresolved murder case, which made everyone uneasy. Hearing this, Louis forgot all about his own pain and rushed out, determined to protect Bok-shil. Soon, there was a familiar figure sprinting down the street, a scene that happened to be captured on television. Watching from home, Granny immediately recognized that the person running was Louis and sent Secretary Kim to track him down. Meanwhile, Jung-won returned home, saw the note Louis had left, and became furious. Since moving back to Bok-shil's place, Louis had taken on the role of his protector. Despite his aching body, he didn't forget to exercise in the yard every day. Tired, he'd make himself a coffee, spilling one and making another, before going to pick up Bok-shil from work. Just as Louis left, an uninvited guest showed up. A scar-faced man crouched down, eyeing the coffee on the ground as if he wanted some. Suddenly, another man wearing a hard hat entered, slamming a hammer onto the scar-faced man's head before leaving the scene. When Curly Hair came over to visit, he was so shocked by the scene before him that he almost wet his pants. Curly Hair immediately called the police, and Bok-shil and Louis were taken to the station. After examining the weapon, they found Louis's fingerprints on it. Despite his attempts to explain that he had only used it, no one believed his story. Watching the news on TV, Jung-won rushed over on his bicycle, only to walk in on Bok-shil and Louis leaning on each other while he alone was stressing out. His anger almost caused his blood pressure to skyrocket, but he still told the police that, judging by Louis's clumsy nature, calling him the murderer was giving him too much credit. The officer who was helping Bok-shil find her younger brother provided a photo of a footprint left in spilled coffee by the actual culprit. Louis took one look and immediately identified the brand of shoes, demonstrating his impressive shopping knowledge. His insight gave the police a new lead. However, given that they couldn't guarantee Bok-shil and Louis's safety during this period, Jung-won decided to let them both move into his house. When he saw Bok-shil carrying large bags while Louis was only holding 2 small flower pots, his frustration boiled over, leading to yet another memorable scene. After meals, he had to wash dishes and make coffee, and his life, once that of a carefree young man, had turned into a never-ending series of responsibilities. Meanwhile, Louis noticed how much Jung-won cared for Bok-shil, making him unable to eat or sleep well. Things weren't going well for the chairman either. After learning that Louis hadn't died in the car accident but only lost his memory, he had been living in constant worry. As he was grappling with this situation, he received a call from his wife. Louis's grandmother had found out that her grandson was still alive, and she had sent the secretary to search for him. His wife, thinking she had done something great, eagerly called to take credit. So, late at night, he went to Jung-won's house, citing company matters as a reason, and requested that Bok-shil be transferred to a branch overseas. This way, Louis would also leave with her. Everything happened just as the two hidden under the table overheard. After the chairman left, they immediately apologized to Jung-won, but he calmly responded. Later, Louis, who had been shopping with a friend, received a call from Jung-won offering him a job where he could earn 50,000 Korean won by working just one day. After carefully dressing up, he arrived at the company and was mistaken by his colleagues for an important person. He confidently ordered a coffee. When Jung-won and Bok-shil returned, they saw Louis in the office. At the same time, a colleague remembered seeing Bok-shil and Louis holding hands, assuming they were in a romantic relationship. The receptionist, who had delivered a coffee, was left surprised when Louis, in a gesture of gratitude, pulled out his dog tag and wrote down his name. After leaving the office, the receptionist realized Louis was simply a temporary worker. Despite his appearance, Louis took his work seriously. The camera shifted, and based on the clues provided by Louis, the police finally captured the criminal after several days of searching. They rewarded him with the amount of money for his contribution. In the end, Louis and Bok-shil bid farewell to Jung-won and moved back to their little house. To celebrate their return, they decided to go on a date. The vast ocean, sweet cotton candy, beautiful shoes, and attractive books all helped the two of them clearly understand their feelings for each other in that moment. Meanwhile, the male officer discovered the wife of Chairman's secret. It was revealed that Louis was the grandson of the chairman of the Golden Group, the person who was supposed to have died in the car accident. After learning this, the wife rushed to tell Chairman, unaware that he was in a meeting with his lawyer, finalizing the inheritance of the company shares, and he was on the verge of losing everything. At the same time, Louis, who had just returned home and hadn't had a chance to greet Bok-shil, was suddenly stopped by several burly men. Without saying a word, they carried him into a car and stopped in front of a red-door mansion. That evening, to celebrate Louis's return, his grandmother immediately called for a meeting and announced that Louis would inherit the company. This declaration shocked everyone. However, they did not know that Louis had not yet regained his memory. While surrounded by luxury, such as a specially made sandwich set, high-end suits and shoes, and his favorite golden 3-in-1 coffee, Louis had carefully laid out a red carpet and prepared a surprise to tell Fushi that, even though his identity had changed, their relationship would remain unchanged. No matter how far apart they were, it wouldn't stop him from missing Bok-shil deeply. The male officer brought Bok-shil to a place made of wood and told her that her brother was dead. It turned out that on the day Louis returned to the country, he encountered a terrorist group. Her brother, Jun-hyuk, was one of the members. He had stolen Louis's luxury car and all his belongings. When the accident occurred, Jun-hyuk died in Louis's place. Bok-shil, devastated by this news, struggled to accept the truth. Unable to cope with the pain, she decided to leave the heartbreaking city, leaving behind a resignation letter. She boarded a bus back to his rural life. To her surprise, when Bok-shil arrived back home, she encountered someone unexpected. Meanwhile, after Louis discovered that Bok-shil had disappeared, he immediately went with the secretary to the deep mountains. Jung-won, once fashionable man, who had given up his career to live in the mountains with Bok-shil. Yet, as a first-time farmer, he was clearly inexperienced. While washing a dish, he tore his pants, and cold air even seeped through the back. Next, he struggled while wearing his work clothes, breaking the handle of the well pump and struggling while fetching water from the western side. At that moment, Louis finally arrived, and he expressed his feelings to Bok-shil. But Bok-shil, to avoid causing them both more pain, spoke from her heart, "I don't like you," and walks away, still remembering her moment with Louis. And Louis on this side felt just as bad. Jung-won was about to reveal the truth to him, but just then, a motorcycle came by. It turns out that the one who had died in his place was Bok-shil's younger brother. Although it was an accident, it became an obstacle in their relationship. Facing the truth, he was speechless in front of Bok-shil and could only, while Bok-shil went to work, quietly wait at the station. clean up the room in silence, put money in the piggy bank. In the end, he decided to leave this sad city and return overseas to continue his life. Before leaving, he boarded a bus, intending to take one last look at the places they once walked together. But just then, he spotted Bok-shil's brother, Jun-hyuk. Jun-hyuk, seeing him, thought Louis had returned to settle a debt and immediately tried to run away. But Louis, just then, fell from a bike and hit his head hard on the ground. The past images flooded back. Louis had once again lost his memory, becoming a street wanderer, wearing the same shabby outfit and encountering the same Bok-shil. Seeing him, Bok-shil immediately rushed toward him. Bok-shil was stunned. Despite his amnesia, Louis still didn't recognize her. At that moment, Bok-shil was shocked, yet she tried to remain composed. She told Louis her name was Bok-shil, but upon hearing it, Louis's eyes turned red. Seeing this, Bok-shil couldn't help but step forward and give him a hug. She then called the secretary, telling him that she had found Louis on the street again. However, when the secretary arrived, he startled Louis, causing a chase to begin. Bok-shil followed Louis onto a ship, but just as they were preparing to disembark, the ship suddenly started moving, leaving Bok-shil behind. In her panic, a familiar voice suddenly echoed. Bok-shil froze in shock. It was the voice she had longed for. It turned out that after Jun-hyuk took all of Louis's belongings, Bok-shil's brother told Louis that once he handed everything over to him, he would return in an hour. However, his friend took all the things, drove off in the luxury car, and ended up in a car accident. Upon seeing this, Jun-hyuk panicked. Louis, who hadn't received the items from Jun-hyuk, encountered more trouble that led to his amnesia after hitting a fire hydrant. Meanwhile, Bok-shil, having just arrived, was reflecting on the situation. Jun-hyuk pulled out his phone and played a video. It turned out that after Louis hit his head on the ground, he had fully regained his memory and was just pretending to lose his memory again. Louis immediately called everyone and informed them of Jun-hyuk's whereabouts. Everyone gathered to plan a surprise for Bok-shil. In the end, the group came together and surprised her, leaving Bok-shil overjoyed. Meanwhile, Louis had already changed into new clothes. Louis opened his arms, and the two of them embraced each other. After Bok-shil found her brother, his relationship with Louis was no longer hindered, and their bond deepened. Grandma joyfully invited the two of them to dinner, but unexpectedly, Bok-shil suddenly felt unwell and rushed to the restroom. She recalled eating 2 bowls of noodles and a bowl of red bean ice that day, thinking that she must have overeaten. Outside, Grandma, unaware of the situation, misunderstood and thought that she is pregnant. Meanwhile, Jun-hyuk, struggling with poor academic performance, was handed over to the secretary by Louis. However, after a month, he still hadn't managed to learn even the most basic tasks, and his mistakes were so bad that they made the secretary question his life. Bok-shil decided to start her own business, selling products from her hometown online. Meanwhile, Louis resigned from his job and joined Bok-shil's company as an executive. However, Louis often ate incorrectly. He would argue with Jung-won, causing him to become quite frustrated. One day, Louis brought some good news. Due to the rapid rise in sales of Bok-shil's products, the Golden Group decided to cooperate with them. To celebrate the partnership, the company held a team-building event soon after. Louis and Jung-won became rivals in the competition. But to everyone's surprise, the silly Louis managed to beat Jung-won in every event, even in the final masked singing competition. Jung-won felt a sense of frustration. That night, Bok-shil looked at the ring in her hand, a gift carefully prepared for Louis. She sent Louis a message, asking him to meet in the small forest. But because her jacket had been lost, Mary suggested wearing her jacket instead. However, when Bok-shil reached the park, she was suddenly knocked out by a man and thrown into a car. When Louis arrived at the small forest, he only found the ring on the ground, but Bok-shil was nowhere to be seen. After Bok-shil was kidnapped, Louis became anxious, unable to eat or sleep, fearing something terrible had happened to her. The man who had kidnapped Bok-shil was a useless man who had been recently released from the hospital after a knife injury. After waking up, he took the opportunity to escape the police's surveillance, then found President and threatened him. The man demanded 10 billion in cash, promising that if the money was given to him, he would leave the country and go into hiding. If not, He would hand over the audio recordings of their plans to the police. The next day, he brought the money. However, the scarred man didn't expect that the money would only pass through his hands briefly. That evening, he encountered a woman wearing a disguise, holding a gun, who had previously stolen Bakshil's bag on the train. She used the same tactic on him, tricking him into buying water. When he returned, she pretended to thank him to relax his guard, then quickly stuck a piece of chewing gum in his hair. As soon as his hands were off the bag, she pushed the man to the ground, then grabbed the bag and ran off. Hiding in an empty corner, the woman dared to open it. To her surprise, the bag was filled with cash. "This is my son's dowry and my own burial fund, all in one," she thought, with a smile. Meanwhile, the scarred man was furious. He had specifically gone to the bookstore to threaten President again, demanding 10 billion. But what could the president do? They agreed to meet the next day to exchange the money. However, the scarred man waited in vain. Instead of President, a male police officer came in. Realizing the situation was bad, the scarred man quickly escaped through the back door. By the time President arrived, the scarred man had vanished. Thinking that President had called the police, the scarred man decided to kidnap his daughter, Mary. However, he mistakenly kidnapped Bakshil, who was wearing Mary's clothes. On the way to the exchange, there was an unexpected car accident, and both were sent to the hospital. Lewis, hearing the news, rushed to the hospital and found that Bakshil only had minor injuries. The scarred man, however, wasn't as fortunate. He woke up to find himself back in police custody. When the president received the news, he realized he couldn't escape the consequences. Overcome with guilt, he confessed everything to Louis, lamenting how he had been blinded by money and done so many wrong things. He then turned himself in to the police. After an interrogation, they confirmed the scarred man's crimes. They arrested the woman who had stolen the 10 billion. Finally, Louis and Bakshil were able to start a new life. Jung-won, who had always been the tragic in the story, was about to face a new chapter. He had lost the girl he liked to someone else. However, one day, he met his true love. He glanced at the woman in front of him, unable to hide his surprise. "What is this?" he thought. The woman smiled mysteriously and pulled him aside, saying, "Buy my life." This immediately reminded Jung-won of the first time he met Bakshil. He couldn't help but look at her again. To his surprise, her bright smile made him lose his composure. The woman introduced herself. Jung-won couldn't help but think, could this be destiny? And just like that, Jung-won bid farewell to Bakshil and embarked on a new romantic journey with his new love. Meanwhile, Louis, who had always been jealous of Jung-won, Louis was on a movie date with Bakshil, but on the screen, a documentary about Golden Group's 30th anniversary played instead. It turned out that Bakshil's parents were also present that day, and they had won a prize. Watching the video, Bakshil saw her late parents and broke down in tears. Louis comforted her, telling her that there was still an important part coming up in the film. The scene then shifted, revealing a young Louis at the event, crying just as much. Little Bakshil, seeing this, went forward, handed him a gift, and comforted him, telling him not to be sad. At that moment, Louis took out the music box from that time. On the bottom was Bakshil's name, revealing that their connection had been destined from the start. Meanwhile, the secretary officially proposed to his crush, and they were expecting a new addition to their family. They invited their friends and family to celebrate with a small wedding, wanting to continue spreading their happiness. And so, the story of Louis and Bakshil came to an end. Thank you all for your love and support. See you in the next K-drama.